Shalom, 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 Israel. Man, I pray you guys are doing well. I know it's the middle of the week. I know it's Wednesday. I know it's hump day. I know it's a day that has you feeling like, dang, I can't wait till the Sabbath is here. But yeah, that's what we're here for, spiritual recharge. Midweek meditation is trying to get your mind right to help preserve you, to help motivate you, to help you moving forward through the Sabbath. You know, that's what it's all about. So I want to welcome each and every one of you to our broadcast today. I want to welcome you to Midweek Meditation so that we can come together and think about the scriptures as it is written, so that we can meditate therein day and night, so that we can encourage each other to read more, apply more, and become more godly, if you will. You know, a lot of us, we're good at doing everything but being godly. And what we need to do is encourage each other to be more and more godly. So today's topic, oh man, if you've been paying attention to the daily verses, it's a little bit inspired by Thanksgiving, right? That's what it's called. That's the day that is coming up tomorrow on Thursday, in which everybody's going to be eating turkey and everyone's going to be having a day of family time, right? Well, things like that. But I'm not coming at you with that perspective. I'm coming at you with a different perspective. I'm coming at you with a perspective of being thankful and having a reason to be thankful. Asking yourself, what are you thankful for? Why are you thankful? And does it take someone to put it on the calendar for you to finally be thankful for something? Does it take for you to for the nation, the United States of America, to ordain it to be a holiday for you to finally visit with family and finally have a meal together when you couldn't do it throughout the rest of the year? You know, that is the question. And today we're going to look at some things biblically and see where we had reason to be thankful and we had reason to celebrate. But many of us today, we don't know. That's why the question is, what are you thankful for? Because you don't know. You don't think about it. You don't consider it. And then you just go and have your Thanksgiving day as if you know why, as if you have good purpose behind it. So I ask that you hit that share button. I ask that you share with your friends, your family, on your timeline, in a direct message, you know, on your wall, whatever it is that whatever platform that you're viewing from, share appropriately. And I will do the same thing. I'm making sure I hit the share button as well. So you can't say I didn't do it. And then we're going to get into it. So I'm just going to take a peek around and see, who is in the building. We're going to say a quick prayer before we get started. Let me go ahead and do that now. So if you could cover your heads, sisters or brothers, take your hats off, whatever, and just have a moment. Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us together once again. We thank you for bringing us together in unity and like mind and understanding that only two can walk together if they are agreed, Lord. So we ask that you continue to bring forth agreement between brothers and between sisters, Lord, and that we agree on one thing and one thing in particular, that we must keep God's commandments, Lord, in the faith of Christ, Lord. That we must keep God's commandments to get the kingdom of heaven, Lord. Lord, so please open our minds, open our spirits to the understanding of what it takes for us to get this kingdom. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so we get started. Today's first verse that we're going to go into is Ezra chapter 3 in verse 11. Ezra chapter 3 in verse 11. Let's start there, brothers. Let's start there, sisters. And like I said, if you could hit that share button, get your friends, get your family in the building, that'd be great. Ezra 3 and 11. And they sang together by course in praising and giving thanks unto the Lord, because he is good, for his mercy endureth forever toward Israel. And all the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. So we got to stop there. We got to think there. We got to take a moment to understand what is going on. I know we like to read our precepts, but sometimes you got to get the context. You can't just start reading the precept and think that you know how to apply it. Think that you understand its purpose. Let's get the context. So, first and foremost, we're noticing that people, they being plural, sang together. So they're singing songs. And in doing so, they're praising and giving thanks unto the Lord. Why are they doing that? Because he is good, for his mercy endureth forever toward Israel. So they're singing and praising God because of the goodness of God and the fact that his mercy endures forever toward Israel. So you're already seeing in one verse, and you haven't read anything else, the context. The context is Israel singing and praising the Lord for the mercy that he's bestowed upon them. And all the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Lord. So when they shouted, why did they shout? Because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. They shouted for a particular reason. They were thankful that the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. So we got to get to understanding what it means by foundation, Haim. We got to get that understanding. So we got to understand that first and foremost, this was not a day known as Thanksgiving, but yet they were giving thanks. It was not commemorated during the time of the pilgrims. This was way back in times way before Plymouth Rock, right? This was in a time with Zerubbabel. This is in a time beyond any American history that we're going into, but yet they are thankful. So there were no Indians, no story of Native American Indians. But instead, this is a moment in which people are coming together with thankfulness toward the Most High God because the foundation is laid. I see you, Gabrielle. So let's go to verse 8. Let's go up to verse 8. It says, now, in the second year of their coming unto the house of God at Jerusalem, in the second month, began Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua the son of Josadak, and the remnant of their brethren, the priests and the Levites. And they that were come out of the captivity unto Jerusalem, and anointed the Levites from 20 years old and upward to set forward the work of the house of the Lord. So we got more context here. Zerubbabel and a bunch of other people are together in the second year that they were together at the house of the Lord. Verse 9. Then stood Jeshua with the sons of his brethren, Kadmiel and his sons, the sons of Judah, together to set forth the workmen in the house of God, the sons of Henadad with their sons and the brethren, the Levites. And when the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, they set the priests in their apparel with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, with cymbals, to praise the Lord after the ordinance of David, king of Israel. And they sang together by course of praising and giving thanks unto the Lord, because he is good, for his mercy endureth forever toward Israel. And all the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. Okay, you didn't miss much, Gabriel. We just started at 5:30. I see you. So we got the context here. We're growing the context here. We're seeing that they are excited about this foundation being laid. They're excited to the point where they're orchestrating an event at the laying of the foundation. They brought forth the trumpets and the cymbals. They're getting dressed appropriately for this celebration. They're not taking this thing lightly. But yet I would ask you, do you understand why this is so important? It's just the foundation, right? Like, it's not like the whole temple is erected. Now, historically, we got to remember that the temple has been destroyed throughout history and rebuilt many times. And this is a particular case where this is being done. They're rebuilding the temple as it had been destroyed previously. I did a lesson a while back, almost a year ago, the history of our temple, and it outlined everything that happened to our temple, how it was destroyed and rebuilt, and destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. So you might want to look for that. You know, True Spirit of Christ has that on record. You might want to look for that to get good understanding on what happened to the temple. It's a long history lesson there. But in this case, one of our notable forefathers named Zerubbabel was given a commandment from the king of Persia to build a house of our God. So we'll find that in the next chapter. Let's go to Ezra 4 and verse 3. But Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the rest of the chief of the fathers of Israel said unto them, Ye have nothing to do with us to build an house unto our God, but we ourselves together will build unto the Lord God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, had commanded us. So in this particular situation, okay, we're in the middle of a context verse here, or passage. And Zerubbabel, what we're isolating and seeing, Ariel, is that Zerubbabel is making sure that other nations don't try to get involved in the work that we need to do for ourselves. Zerubbabel is letting them know that, you know, we're supposed to build the house of God, of our God. And we were given instruction and commandment by the king of Persia to be able to do it. And it would be foolish of us to be allowing other people to get their hands involved in it. As a matter of fact, it would be foolish because it says, verse 4, Then the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Judah and troubled them in building. It would be foolish because we already know you have an agenda. And we're not going to give you any more of an upper hand than you already have. You're already weakening us. You're already troubling us in building. But to allow you to really get closer, to get an inside scoop, will be a problem. Verse 5 says, And hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose. That was the reason they wanted to get with us, was to frustrate our purpose. All the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So that would happen in chapter 4. Now, we're 2 years into the building process here, as we read in chapter 3, verse 8. And Zerubbabel and the other Israelites are pressing forward with the work that needs to be done to build. But at this point in time, 2 years in, they are just getting to the point of laying the foundation. So keep in mind that these people were building and were working on something that didn't get erected overnight, on something that wasn't created with quickness and speed that would satisfy the people who have this microwave mentality that we have here in America in 2020. We want things to be built overnight. That's not what's going on here. They're in the second year of it. So this is at least 1 year gone by, and they're in the second year. So this obviously is something that takes time to build. It took sacrifice. And according to Ezra 2, let's go there, verse 65 through 70, we're going to see that it took a lot of sacrifice from a lot of different people. It says, besides their servants, matter of fact, we got to start at 64. The whole congregation together was 42,303 score. 42,360. Beside their servants and their maids, of whom there were 7,337. And there were among them 200 singing men and singing women. So there's over 42,000 people involved here. Their horses were 736. Their mules 245. Their camels 435. Their asses 6,720. And some of the chiefs of the fathers, when they came to the house of the Lord, which is at Jerusalem, offered freely for the house of God to set it up in its place. Look at all the animals that they have. Look at all the people that they have. And then when you look at these people, they're offering freely of what they have in their substance to the house of God, to set up God's place. They gave after their ability unto the treasure of the work 61,000 drams of gold. They gave up gold, and 5,000 pounds of silver. They gave up silver, and 100 priests' garments. They gave fly garments to wear. So the priests and the Levites and some of the people and the singers and the porters and the Nethinims dwelt in their cities, and all Israel in their cities. So what are we seeing here? That a huge sacrifice was made by a large number of people to ensure that what was to be done had the resources to do it. That the people who were doing this service, like the Levites had a role here. The priests had a role here. People had to go and leave their occupations, leave their security, and go and travel to do this particular thing. They needed support. And there were people who were willing to support. And not only were there the people who were standing by not doing the work, who were supporting financially, but even the people who were working were supporting financially. So they paid to do the work, if you will. But that's the type of spirit and the great thought and the great mind that the people had, was that I'm going to do what I need to do to help my people. I'm going to do what I need to do to make sure that the house of the Lord is taken care of. And nobody had a self-centered mindset. No one said, well, what about me? I want to get this and I want to do that. No one shut anything down because it didn't fit their agenda. These were 40-something thousand supporters. Look how many Israelites could work together if they put their mind to it. Look how many people can actually come together and accomplish something. So we see. Ezra 3:1. And when the 7th month was come, and the children of Israel were in the cities, the people gathered themselves together as one man to Jerusalem. Skip down to verse 6, because what we're finding out here is the time frame in which people are coming together and doing this work. Verse 6 says, from the first day of the 7th month, began they to offer burnt offerings unto the Lord, but the foundation of the temple was not yet laid. So we're seeing a moment in history prior to the second year when the foundation is getting laid. We're seeing a point in which it's not laid. But even at this time, what do we see? They're still giving offerings. It said, verse 5 actually. No, let's read verse 2. Then stood up Jeshua the son of Josadak and his brethren and priests, and Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and his brethren, and builded the altar of God, the altar of the God of Israel, to offer burnt offerings thereon, as it was written in the law of Moses, the man of God. So even before the foundation was laid, they made sure that there was an altar so that they could provide the burnt offerings. And they were following the laws that were written before time for their learning, the laws that were written of Moses. Verse 3 says, and they set the altar upon its basis, for fear was upon them because the people of those countries, and they offered burnt offerings thereon unto the Lord, even burnt offerings morning and evening. So even though they weren't in a comfortable space, they still did their offering with the nations and the enemy all around. Verse 4, they kept also the Feast of Tabernacles. What? They kept the Feast of Tabernacles and there was no temple? Because a lot of people act like you have to have a temple in order to keep a feast, but clearly here they didn't. You have to be in Jerusalem in a temple. Well, we have no temple to be in, and they're still keeping the law. As it is written, and offered the daily burnt offerings by number, according to the custom, as the duty of every day required. And afterward offered the continual burnt offerings, both of the new moons and all of the set feasts of the Lord that were consecrated, and every one that willingly offered a freewill offering unto the Lord. That's good stuff, because as we read the next verse, it says, from the first day of the 7th month began they to offer burnt offerings unto the Lord, but the foundation of the temple of the Lord was not yet laid. There's a lot of people who would make excuses not to give their offerings because there was no temple, because there was no altar. But a real supporter is going to find a way to support. If they got to build an altar, they'll do it, just so that they can lay their tithe among it. They gave money also unto the masons, and to the carpenters, and meat, and drink, and oil, unto them of Zidon, and to them of Tyre, to bring cedar trees from Lebanon to the seas of Joppa, according to the grant that they had of Cyrus, king of Persia. So, while this is going on, the foundation has not been laid, and even though everything is not perfect, everything is not beautiful, everything is not complete, they're still doing what they have to do to be righteous stewards. And it's something that we can definitely take a note from, because a lot of times we feel like it has to be perfect before we make a move. We feel like we got to have had the perfect class and the perfect opportunity. We practice it in such a way. But what we find out is thank God, even when things ain't made it to the point in which it's going to be great. You know, some people, you got time to thank God. God is giving you chance and opportunity and mercy. But for others, you never know. You never know when your time is up. So I encourage you to think. Be thankful as soon as possible. So we just, Ezra 3 verse 3 again. And they set the altar upon its basis, for there was fear upon them because of the people of those countries, and they offered burnt offerings thereon unto the Lord, even burnt offerings morning and evening. So they did this all the day. They did this in the morning, they did this in the evening, and they didn't miss a beat. They didn't have excuses for why they didn't get it done. They got it done. Let's go down to verse 10. Then stood Jeshua with his sons and his brethren, Kadmiel and his sons and the sons of Judah together, set forth the workmen in the house of God, the sons of Henadad, with their sons and their brothers and Levi. And when the builders laid the foundation of the temple, they set the priests in their apparel with trumpets, and the Levite son of Asaph with cymbals to praise the Lord, after the ordinance of David, king of Israel. So we're making our way through these verses slowly but surely. And we see a bit of obedience as they follow the late king of Israel into repentance. So when you think about this and the foundation is not complete, remember we're 2 years in and we just got to the foundation. It's letting us know a couple of things. That the temple is not complete, but there will be some work that needs to be done before we can get some rest. And I'm saying this as an underlying base to support whatever is to come. Because these people probably did not plan to go where they were. But there comes a point in which the foundation is sturdy. Now, anyone who knows anything about real estate and property, the foundation is a key moment because that's when property taxes start to kick in based on the improvements that you have. Once you build a foundation, they're going to look at it as this is a property with something on it. And so that's how the nations act. That's how the nations act. Verse 11, again, Ezra 3 and 11. And they sang together by course of praising and giving thanks unto the Lord. See, it's key to be able to do that. It's important to be able to do that. Because we got brothers, we got sisters that need to learn it. Just to give us an opportunity and a chance to praise God and for Him to hear us. So, the story is important. The story is great because you're seeing your people show praise and glory towards small key accomplishments. You're seeing them, praise the little thing. Like, I don't know, who knows anything about building a building? A foundation is not even half the job. But without that part of the job, nothing else really can get done. You don't have walls, you don't have roof, you don't have plumbing, you don't have electrical, you don't have lights, you don't have doors, you don't have windows, but you have the foundation. And I love that in this example, you have people who can go a year plus time without seeing their tangible reward. But they know that they are building towards something valuable. They know that they have set the foundation, and that is the greatness to come. So it's a key moment. Because like I said, that's when the taxes begin to come in. That's when the value, everybody else looks at the value of it. That's a moment in time when these other nations, as we were reading in the other verse, in the other chapter, is coming forth. They say, let's frustrate the work. So, if we read on, verse 11, that they sang together, we read verse 12, and it says this. But many of the priests and the Levites and the chiefs of their fathers, who were ancient men, that had seen the first house, when the foundation of this house was laid before their eyes, wept with a loud voice. And many shouted aloud for joy. Okay. It was at this moment that tears began to fall from the builder's eyes. The workers began to see such a joy within it. The workers began to see the importance of what they have done, and it began to affect them emotionally. They had reason to be thankful because their previous building had been destroyed. Their previous foundation had been destroyed. Their previous temple, in which it was the house of the Lord, in which they were able to do what they were supposed to do with the belief that they were doing it in, was destroyed. So this story is very important because they had a reason to be thankful. But many of us, we tend to come into moments in our life without reason, without understanding. We don't have a why. So like with a day like Thanksgiving, which is recognized as a holiday, but people don't understand the purpose behind it. Because every holy day in the Bible always had a foundation and a story behind it that was commemorated. Just as with every holiday on the American calendar, it has the same. There's reason to it. The celebration has reason, but our people don't think of that. Our people don't consider that. We too commonly enjoy the festivity without knowing the reason for the season, the reason behind it. Isaiah 1:3 says that the ox knoweth his owner and the ass his master's crib, but Israel doth not know, my people doth not consider. Our people don't really consider the things that are important about their legacy, about the history, about the God that they serve. They don't consider. And today we have to think about that. Today we have to change that. Today we have to consider. But you know what tends to plague us? We love simplicity. Proverbs 1:22. It says, how long, ye simple ones, will ye love simplicity? And the scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. It's time for us to stop hating the truth, the knowledge, the wisdom behind what God has been trying to tell us. It's time for us to begin to accept that we're wrong about our feeling and emotion that drives us, and God has a perfect way for us. It's time for us to stop accepting mediocrity. It's time for us to stop accepting everybody else's history and heritage except for ours. It's time for us to stop being simple. So now, many of us have ignorantly celebrated the triumph over our own people. That's what Thanksgiving ends up being about. For the so-called black people with us today, you know, you're online and you're paying attention. You're in company of people who have been called African American, who have been labeled as those who have come across in the slave trade as from Africa. But you don't understand that a good majority of us are actually Native Americans. A good majority of us were here before the Pilgrims, before the settlers, before the whatever you want to label these people, the immigrants as well. Contrary to popular belief, not all of us were brought here on slave ships. So many of the black people in America had nothing to do with the transatlantic slave trade. But I'm sure most people are too lazy to look up this history. Most of us are too content with our slave masters telling us our own history. We're too content with simply believing what someone else tells us. Well, this is what they told me in elementary school. This is what they told me in junior high. This is what they told me, so this is what I'm going with. Even though there's plenty of contradicting information out there. So, and what's worse, we're believing, the main people that we're believing the story from is the same people that enslaved us. And then you get upset when your own people try to bring you good information that may differ from what that slave master told you. Let's look at an article. Let's look at an article. And this article is going to give us a little extra information that you may not normally get in your textbooks in grade school, that you may not normally get from the people who enslaved you. But let's get it. This article, it says 98% of African Americans are in fact Native American Indians, are Native Indians and are owed millions. Here we go. Look at this picture here. This sister here. You know, I would say she looks like she might be a little black. But yet, because she's dressed in such a way, and in this article, you can't help but to give her a little credit for being Native American, right? Let's read a little. And don't forget, don't shy away from who we're looking at here. That looks like a famous so-called African-American basketball player named Kyrie Irving. It says 10 of millions of black Americans, or rather Indians, who disappeared after 1492 did not all die in the Holocaust inflicted within America. See, the popular belief is that the majority of the Native Americans that lived here ended up dying. And now there's really not that many Native Americans here. This article says differently. Hundreds of thousands were shipped to Europe and Africa as Indian slaves. So wait a minute. In the 1400s, or right after the 1400s, many Native Americans were shipped to Europe and Africa as slaves. So we only think about the Africans that come to the Americas as slaves, but there were also Indians that went to Europe and Africa as slaves. The whole slave trade story was given to all of us in reverse. A mass colony of Africans were not shipped from Africa to America. The truth is the black Indians were shipped from America to Europe. The Indians were black. They were then shipped from Spain to Africa as commodity for African resources. These black Indians, now mistaken as African Americans, were shipped back to America and classified as African slaves. This part of our history is what school systems fail to mention in history programs. So check that out. Every European nation that colonized North America utilized Indian slaves for construction. Every European nation that colonized North America used Indian slaves for construction. Plantations and mining on the North American continent, but more frequently in their outposts in the Caribbean and the metropolis of Europe. All historians note that nowhere in the more authentic documentation than in South Carolina, also known as the original English colony of Carolina, established in 1670. It is estimated that between 1650 and 1730, at least 50,000 Indians, and likely more due to transactions hidden to avoid paying government tariffs and taxes, were exported by the English alone to the Caribbean outposts. Between 1670 and 1717, far more Indians were exported than Africans were imported. In southern coastal regions, entire tribes were exterminated through slavery compared to disease or war. In a law passed in 1704, Indian slaves were conscripted to fight in wars for the colony long before the American Revolution. Where's all this history? Why wasn't this taught to us in school? Brief Indian slavery complexity. I feel like I could give y'all a little Zoom action, help y'all see a little better what I'm talking about, hopefully. But just so you know, here is the website that I am looking at, the OklahomaEagle.net. Indians found themselves caught between colonial strategies for power and economic control. That's the key to what we're talking about here is Indians were dealing with colonial strategies for economic power and control. The fur trade in the Northeast, the English plantation system in the South, and the Spanish mission system in Florida collided with major disruption to Indian communities. All of this European issues were beginning to cause turmoil within the Indian lifestyle, if you will. Indians displaced from their fur trade in the North migrated south, where plantation owners armed them to hunt for slaves living in Spanish mission communities. The French, the English, and the Spanish often capitalized on the slave trade in other ways. For example, they garnered diplomatic favor when they negotiated the freedom of slaves in exchange for peace, friendship, and military allegiance. See, it was all about the politics and the diplomacy here. In another instance of Indian and colonial complicity in the slave trade, the British had established ties with the Chickasaw, who were surrounded by enemies on all sides in Georgia. They conducted extensive slave raids in the lower Mississippi Valley, where the French had a foothold, which they sold to the English as a way to reduce Indian populations and keep the French from arming them first. Ironically, the English also saw it was a more effective way to civilize them compared to the efforts of the French missionaries. The Indian slave trade covered an area from as far west as south as Mexico, then Spanish territory, northward to the Great Lakes. Historians believe that all tribes in this vast swath of land were caught up in the slave trade in one way or another. either as captives or traders. Slavery was a part of the larger strategy to depopulate the land to make way for European settlers. Listen to that. Slavery was a strategy to depopulate the land, meaning get rid of the people who were already there so that the European settlers could come. As early as 1636, after the Pequot War, in which 300 Pequots were massacred, those who remained were sold into slavery and sent to Bermuda. Major slaving ports included Boston, Salem, Mobile, New Orleans. From those ports, Indians were shipped to Barbados by the English, Martinique and Guadeloupe by the French, and Antilles by the Dutch. Indian slaves were also sent to the Bahamas as breaking grounds where they might have been transported back to New York and Antigua. So they shipped us to different places and then brought us back to the Americas after we were ready to be good slaves, right? The historical records indicates a perception that Indians did not make good slaves. When they weren't shipped far from their home territories, they too easily escaped and were given refuge by other Indians not in their own communities. So it was another strategy is to take them far away from their home and then bring them back after they've been broken. They died in high numbers on the transatlantic journeys and succumbed easily to European disease. By 1676, Barbados had banned Indian slavery, citing too bloody and dangerous an inclination to remain here. As the Indian slave trade gave way to the American slave trade by the 1700s, by then, over 300 years old, the Native American women began to intermarry with imported Africans, producing mixed-race offspring whose native identities become obscure through time. In the colonial project to eliminate the landscape of Indians, these mixed-race people simply became known as colored people through bureaucratic erasure in public records. So notice how now you get to a point where you don't even know who is who because the name of the people has been changed to colored. So these dark-skinned Native American Indians are beginning to change in feature because they're beginning to mix with the other slaves that were brought from the shores of Africa or from wherever they were. And now their name of Indian is being taken from and the word colored is being given to them. Now, don't get me wrong, Indian wasn't their name either, but classification for public record. In some cases, such as Virginia, even when people were designated as Indians on birth or death certificates or other public records, their records were changed to reflect color. Census takers determine a person's race by their looks. So these look like the same people. Often recorded mixed race simply as simply black, not Indian. The result is that today there's a population of people of Native American heritage and identity, particularly in the Northeast, who are not recognized by society at large, sharing similar circumstances with freedmen of the Cherokee and other 5 civilized tribes, as documented on the Dawes Rolls card by the United States Dawes Roll Administration. Native American Indian tribes have been awarded nearly $1 billion in historical settlement. I'm going to stop there because I want you to just make sure you understand that you see that historically when we're thinking about the Native American Indians, this all happened in pursuit of the ability to create America, to allow the settlers to take over this land and create the infrastructure that you know today. Now, as much as you may be proud to be an American, as much as you may love the government doing things for you, you have to understand there's a bloody history behind it. And when we begin to celebrate it, we got to realize that our people were doing just fine until then. And what we're celebrating is the destruction of our people and the assimilation of the rest of us into the society that we're in now. You know, in many cases, we fail to recall Psalms 83, verse 3 and 4. It says, let's start at 2. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. So what we see here is multiple nations of people. And of course, we understand, that the Europeans as a whole, even though they come from different countries, they're collectively working together as one people. But these different nations of people are coming together with one objective in mind. And that one objective is to take over what God has given to his people, and to take over that group of people as well, and cut them off from their heritage, cut them off from the remembrance of who they are. See, we find a lot of documentation that the Native American Indians knew who they were, that they knew that they came from Jacob, that they knew who their God was. But over time, it began to be said, nah, these are pagans. These are people who are worshiping idols. These are people who are savages and have no understanding of their own, of anything of value. And we believe that. And we sit back and play cowboys and Indians, and we want to be the cowboy and kill the Indian. And we don't think about the fact that we're going against our own people. We don't think about the fact that not only when I say own people from a distant space, I mean you really one of them. So we got to go to another location here, because this article that we read, it talked about the fact that our school didn't teach us everything. So I want to go to an article or a book called Lies My Teacher Told Me. And in this book, there's a lot of historical facts that we've learned in school, and we come to realize that it's not accurate. It's not good history. We're going to go to chapter 3, the first Thanksgiving. Couple of quotes here. The truth about the first Thanksgiving. Considering that virtually none of the standard fare surrounding Thanksgiving contains an ounce of authenticity, historical accuracy, or cross-cultural perception, why is it so apparently ingrained? Is it necessary to the American psyche to perpetually exploit and debase its victims in order to justify its history? That was said by Michael Doris. Let's see if we can get a little understanding on who Michael Doris is real quick. Give me a second to find something. But think about what is going on here. Michael Doris, he's an author of a book called Why I'm Not Thankful for Thanksgiving. Let me find them. Be careful, be patient. I'm getting there. Gotta see what Google gives me. All right. Here goes Michael Doris. Doesn't seem to be too black. Doesn't seem to look like one of our people. And I find that important to say because you know you don't like listening when your own people tell you anything. You know, you only want to deal with the people who look like your slave master and your oppressor, but you don't want to deal with the people who look like you. Now, I can't give you much information about this guy, but he had a reason to not be happy about Thanksgiving. I think that's something you should take a look at. Here goes a little bibliography of other books. And if you read through Lies My Teacher Told Me, you begin to see spark notes or references from other people like Francis Jennings, Howard Simpson. Francis Jennings talks about the invasion of America. It was an invasion. And it talks about Indians, colonialism, and the cant of conquest. Howard Simpson talks about invisible armies, the impact of disease on American history. So we see that, and let's read on. The quotes are as follows. European explorers and invaders discovered an inhabited land. See, that's the false thing. You act like you discovered America, but it was already inhabited. It was not anything that was lost. It was not anything that was never before seen. It was already inhabited. Had it been pristine wilderness then, it would possibly be so still. For neither the technology nor the social organization of Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries had the capacity to maintain of its own resource. Outpost colonies thousands of miles from home. It says the Europeans were able to conquer America not because of military genius or their religious motivation or their ambition or their greed. They conquered it by waging unpremeditated biological warfare. We'll have to get more into that. It is painful to advert to these things, but our forefathers, the wise, pious, and sincere, were nevertheless in respect to Christian charity under a cloud. And in history, truth should be held sacred at whatever cost, especially against the narrow and futile patriotism which, instead of pressing forward in pursuit of truth, takes pride in walking backwards to cover the slightest nakedness of our forefathers. Heavy statements. Heavy statements. So we're going to read through a little bit of this. I'm going to have to skip around because there's a lot to be read here. But it says this in this chapter. Over the last few years, I've asked hundreds of college students. These are people who are educated, made good grades in high school, junior high, etc. When was the country we know now as the United States first settled? This is a generous way of phrasing the question. Surely, we now know, surely, we now know as implies that the original settlement antedated the founding of the United States. I initially believed, certainly, I had hoped that students would suggest 30,000 BC or some other pre-Columbian date. They did not. Their consistent answer was 1620. So I find it important to think about the fact that when we live in America, our history seems to only go back as far as the 1600s, maybe the 1400s, for Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, right? But we don't have any pre-Columbian history that we like to tell here. And we know that the world in its existence is old, but we act as if it's not. And we act as if there was no land over here and it popped up magically out of nowhere in the 1600s. Obviously, my students' heads have been filled with Americans' origin myth, the story of the first Thanksgiving. Textbooks are among the retailers of this primal legend. Part of the problem is the word settle. Settlers were white. Everybody think white is right? A student once pointed out to me, Indians didn't settle. Students are not the only people misled by settle. The film that introduces visitors to Plymouth Plantation tells how they went about the work of civilizing a hostile wilderness. One Thanksgiving weekend, I listened as a guide as the Statue of Liberty talked about European immigrants populating a wild East Coast. As we shall see, however, if the American Indians hadn't already settled New England, Europeans would have had much tougher job of it. Starting the story of the Americas settlement, the Pilgrims leaves out not only the American Indians, but also the Spanish. So America's good at leaving out history, and they'll leave out history of even people that are close to them. So we skip down a little bit here. It says, between 1565 and 1568, Spaniards explored the Carolinas, building several forts that were then burned by the Indians. Some later Spanish settlers were our first pilgrims, seeking regions new to them to secure religious liberty. These were Spanish Jews who settled in New Mexico in the late 1500s. Now, I want to call something out here, and I'm not bringing it up to compare to the other doctrines completely. Let me rephrase that, to the other historical accounts, I should say. But keep in mind, history shows us that there were black Jews that were exiled from their land in those time frames. That there were black Jews that were not allowed to keep their belief system, and these were called Moors. So I encourage you to read into this to see what relevancy this may have. Now it says that few Americans know that 1/3 of the United States, from San Francisco to Arkansas to Natchez to Florida, has been Spanish longer than has been American. Few Americans consider that, because my people don't consider, right? And the Hispanic Americans lived here before the first ancestors of the daughters of the American Revolution ever left England. You got to think about how that could be when all of the South America, Central America, spoke Spanish. And by the time the American Revolution is occurring, by the time the English are getting into power, they're dealing with people who speak Spanish. That means that the Spaniards were already in power. Moreover, Spanish culture left an indelible mark on the American West. The Spanish introduced horses, cattle, sheep, pigs, and basic elements of cowboy culture, including a vocabulary, Mustang, Bronco, rodeo, lariat, and so on. Horses that escaped from the Spanish and propagated, triggered the rapid flowering of a new culture among the Plains Indians. How refreshing it could be, wrote James Axtell, to find a textbook that began on the West Coast before treating the traditional Eastern colonies. That would be a different history if we started from the West Coast instead of the East Coast. Why don't they? Perhaps because most textbook authors are WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So that's why we can't get the good history, the proper history, because it's WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Okay. So as we skip a little bit here, we're going to see that the Dutch didn't get their history put in there either. But that was all key history. So we'll read here. After some exploring, the Pilgrims chose the land around Plymouth Harbor for their settlement. Unfortunately, they had arrived in December and were not prepared for the New England winter. However, they were aided by friendly Indians who gave them food and showed them how to grow corn. When the warm weather came, the colonists planted, fished, hunted, and prepared themselves for the next winter. After harvesting their crop, they and their Indian friends celebrated the first Thanksgiving. That's what history tells us. My students also remember that the Pilgrims had been persecuted in England for their religious belief. That's one of the reasons why they moved here, right? But I'm going to skip down to the highlighted area. But when I asked my students about the plague, they just stare back at me. What plague? The Black Plague? No, I sigh. That was 3 centuries earlier. Most people are not getting the history on the plague that occurred when the settlers came, when the Pilgrims came. The Black Plague does provide a useful introduction. However, William Langer has written that the Black or bubonic plague was undoubtedly the worst disaster that has ever befallen mankind. So plagues become huge disasters within dealing with mankind. We're definitely in a relevant time frame given COVID-19 and whatnot that's going on. So it says here, I'll just read on. In the years 1348 through 1350, it killed perhaps 30% of the population of Europe. So Europeans went through a plague and it killed a good number of them. Catastrophic as that was, the disease itself comprised only part of the horror. According to Langer, almost everyone in medieval time interpreted the plague as a punishment by God for human sins, thinking the day of judgment was imminent. Farmers did not plant crops. Many people gave themselves over to alcohol. Civil and economic disruption may have caused as much death as disease itself. I want you to think about how disease, when introduced, kills, but then there are a lot of other issues that come along with the pandemic, with the plague, that kill just as much or more people than the disease itself. So they gave themselves over to alcohol. That's something key to think about. The entire culture of Europe was affected. Fear, death, and guilt became prime artistic motive. Milder plagues like typhus, syphilis, influenza, as well as bubonic, continued to ravage Europe until the end of the 17th century. So they were plagued. Europe was full of plagues all into the 1600s. The warmer parts of Europe and Asia and Africa have historically been breeding grounds for most human illnesses. So that was a European thing. It says people moved to cooler climates only with the aid of cultural inventions, clothing, shelter, fire, that helped maintain warm temperatures around their bodies. Microbes that live outside the human host during the part of the life cycle have trouble coping with northern Europe and Asia. Let's skip down. These first immigrants entered into the Americas through a frigid decontamination chamber. The first settlers in the Western Hemisphere thus probably arrived in a healthier condition than most people on Earth because they enjoyed before or since. A healthier condition than most people on Earth have enjoyed before or since. Many of the diseases had long shadowed them, simply could not survive the journey. Neither did some animals. People in the Western Hemisphere had no cows, pigs, horses, sheep, goats, or chickens before the arrival of Europeans and Africans after 1492. Many diseases from anthrax to tuberculosis, cholera, streptococcus, ringworm, to various poxes are passed back and forth between humans and livestock. Since early inhabitants of the Western Hemisphere had no livestock, they caught no diseases for them. So the Western Hemisphere was a healthier side of the world for reasons such as this, that they did not pass disease between livestock. They did not have certain type of animals, and they were, of a certain climate. Europe and Asia were made unhealthy by subtle factors, social density. That sounds a lot like social distancing, right? Organisms that cause disease need a constant supply of new hosts for their own survival. This requirement is nowhere clearer than in the case of smallpox, which cannot survive outside a living human body. But in the enthusiasm, the organism often kills its host. Thus, the pestilence creates its own predicament. It requires new victims at regular intervals. The various influenza viruses must likewise move on, for if their victims survive, they enjoyed a period of immunity lasting at least a few weeks, and sometimes a lifetime. Small-scale societies like the Peyote Indians of Nevada, living in isolated nuclear and extended families, could and did suffer post-Columbian smallpox epidemics, transmitted to them by more urban neighbors, but they could not sustain such an organism over time. Even residents of villages did not experience sufficient social density. Villagers might encounter 300 people a day, but these would usually be the same 300 people. Coming into repeated contact with the same few people does not have the same consequences as meeting new people, either for human culture or for culturing microbes. Some areas in the Americas did have high social density. Incan roads, however, which connected towns to northern Ecuador and Chile, Um, Other places that number up to 40,000 people. I'm going to skip to the next paragraph here. The scarcity of disease in America was partly attributed to the basic hygiene practiced by the region's inhabitants. Residents of Northern Europe and England rarely bathe. See, they don't teach us this in history, but it's documented. Believing it unhealthy and rarely removed all of their clothing at one time, believing it immodest. The pilgrims smelled bad to the Indians. The Indians were fresh, and the pilgrims were not. Squanto tried without success to teach them to bathe, according to Finney Zener, his biographer. Finney Zener is Squanto's biographer, and he wrote that down about the baths. And look what we see here. Queen Isabella only took 2 baths in her life. That's a queen. But ain't got no hygiene. She had, never mind. Within 3 years, the plague wiped out between 90 and 96% of the inhabitants of coastal New England. Native society, because they didn't bathe, people was dying. Unable to cope with so many corpses, the survivors abandoned their villages and fled an often neighboring tribe. And because they carried the infestation with them, American Indians died who had never encountered a white person. Howard Simpson described the horrific scenes that the pilgrims saw. Villages lay in ruins because there was no one to tend to them. The ground was strewn with the skulls and bones of thousands of Indians who had died, and none was left to bury them. The biggest single change in the treatment of Native Americans is the inclusion of this illustration in most of the new textbook. The first edition of Lies My Teacher Told Me decried the absence of any treatment and repeated epidemics that ravaged Native populations. No book includes this illustration or any representation of the disease. These Aztec drawings depict smallpox, coupled with the words of William Bradford, convey something of horror of the epidemic around Plymouth. A sore disease cannot befall the Indians. They fear it more than the plague, for usually they have this disease, have them in abundance. And for want of bedding and linen and other helps, they fall into lamentable conditions as they lie on their hard mats, the pox breaking and mattering and running into another, their skin cleaving by reason thereof to the mats they lie on. When they turn them, a whole side will flay off at once, as it were, and they will be all of a gore blood, most fearful to behold. And then, being very sore with cold and other distempers, they die like rotten sheep. Quoted in Simpson, Invisible Armies. See, it's called Invisible Armies because this disease was the thing that conquered the Native American Indians. It killed the Native American Indians. Indians died without having to even come in contact with white people. And don't you think that they took advantage of this situation? They were able to take over these villages, take over this land, take over this opportunity to now be the settlers instead of the savages, instead of the immigrants. Instead of, they are now looked at as the great people. After a smallpox epidemic, the Cherokee despaired so much that they lost confidence in their gods, and priests destroyed the sacred objects of the tribe. Look what happened when the disease was brought to them. Native healers could supply no cure. Their medicines and herbs offered no relief because they hadn't encountered this before. It came out of nowhere. Their religion provided no explanation. of what whites did. Like the Europeans 3 centuries before them, many American Indians surrendered to alcohol, converted to Christianity, or simply killed themselves. So I want you to think about that, because this is the holiday origin that you celebrate, but none of the actual history has been given. And you're not considering or caring. You're just so happy to have turkey, cranberry sauce, dressing. And you think that it's great to do it, but in the meantime, the real story behind it led to the destruction of your people, the forgetting of your heritage, and the whitewashing of who you are. So when we read these verses in Ezra, we find that we have to be thankful for a reason, and thankful for the mercy that God has given us. That he redeems us, and he gives us the opportunity to rebuild the temple, even in captivity. But yet, when Thanksgiving comes around, what are we thankful for? I'm thankful for the Beamer, Benz, or Bentley that you got me, Lord. I'm thankful for the big booty Judy that you allowed me to be with, Lord. You know, as Nelly and the Saint Lunatics accept their award for tip drill that say first giving honor to God. We'll be thankful for all kind of foolishness. But that be the devil blessing that. So I want to encourage you to get a little history into your system. Stay away from the folly of Thanksgiving Day and start to keep God's holy days and have reason and meaning behind them. So we read the book, Lies My Teacher Taught Me. Go get it. It's got a lot of different stuff, more than just Thanksgiving. And we read some articles that let us know and understand that so many black people in America are actually Native American Indians still. Just lost the name. And with that, you know, I want to let you go and let you get yourself prepared to boycott that thing. I know now most of you think I can't wait to get off of here. That's why maybe, you know, the numbers may be low today, because you're getting ready to make your Black Friday shopping list. You're getting your last few moments of grocery shopping in so you can make that sweet potato pie or whatever. You know, whatever your thing is, stop, repent, come back to God's commandments so that God can restore the land that belongs to you. So that was today's lesson. What are you thankful for? You should be thankful that God is delivering you, waking you up to the truth, that God is helping you to rebuild a nation. And I like that we saw in the example that people had patience, that they could be thankful for the small things. See, that'd be a lot of our issues in Israel. We can't be thankful for the process. We can't enjoy the process of building. We want it already to be built. The temple has to be here, and if it's not, then oh well, we just won't have a temple then. We'll go back to the world. No, build, build, build. Rejoice in the mercy that God has given you and rebuild. And that's what we're doing here. We're rebuilding. So with that, I'm going to let you go. Shout out to those who donated. Shout out to those who put forth the effort and the work to give us the Bible trivia, to give us the daily verses, you know, and to keep the website running and the social media running. So with that, I want to say thank you. And if you want to donate, feel free to go to midweekmeditations.com/donations. I'll post that on the screen, and then we'll see you again next week.
Meditate. Get complete understanding.